Hey everyone, it's Romeo, and in this video I want to share with you why this book right here, which is highly recommended among the Spanish language learning community, is probably not the book that you want to start with if you want to start your Spanish speaking journey. And I'm going to give you 3 reasons why. First, I'll start with a story. So last year, I went to Medellin, Colombia, and while I was there, I wanted to at least talk to people in a formal environment. So I decided to go to one of the many Spanish language schools that they have in Medellin. And as I was talking to one of the instructors, after I was paired, it was probably someone around my age or younger, in their 30s or something like that. I started speaking with them, and then, or I started speaking with him. And what I realized in that moment is that he was giving me some weird looks, but I didn't say anything about it. Eventually, what he shared with me is that I spoke too formal. And I'm like, what do you mean? And so he started telling me that the Spanish that he is used to hearing among people that are his peers is more informal. And if you started your Spanish studies, you'll know what I'm talking about. In Spanish, there is the intimate form of address that uses tú, and then there's the formal form of address that uses usted. And so Madrigal uses primarily the usted form, or the formal way of teaching Spanish. And this is the book that I started with, among other resources that I use, but this mainly is the source that I used for my studies. And so you would think, after going through 45 chapters of this book, that anything that I learned, that's what I'm going to speak with, and that's exactly what happened. So, Madrigal, this book uses the formal way of address, and it does so for 44 chapters, and it's only a 45 chapter book. So it's not until chapter 45 where it finally tells you that, oh, by the way, there's this intimate form of address. And it's important to understand that the intimate form of address is very likely the form of address that you are going to use when you talk to friends and your peers, and especially when you go to somewhere like Medellin, Colombia, where they, as told by the instructor, use the informal address more than they do any other form. So that's the first reason. Like, you don't want to go through 45 chapters of this book and then find out, or while you're going through this book and you talk to someone online, because a lot of people use Spanish language learning lessons online, like you're talking to them and then you're not understood, or you're being constantly corrected because they want you to speak in the intimate form of address as opposed to speaking in the formal address. So that's the number one reason why I probably wouldn't recommend this book to start with. The second reason why I wouldn't recommend this book is because it doesn't have a listening component. And so what does that mean? That means, like, as you're going through this book, if you've never been introduced to the Spanish language, how do you know what you are reading is being said correctly, or that you are actually understanding it the way it's supposed to be pronounced? It's bad enough as you are learning Spanish that if your primary language is English, like, you have to get used to the way Spanish is spoken. But once you start throwing accents into your words, like, there's a different way that the words are going to be said. And so Madrigal tries to do a good job of giving you a pronunciation key in the first part of the book. But again, it's like, if you don't have anyone to self-correct you, or if you don't have anything to listen to make sure that you are saying it correctly, then it's like you can be learning bad habits in your pronunciation. So that's the second reason why I wouldn't want to recommend this, knowing what I know now. And then the third reason why I wouldn't want to recommend this book to start is because it doesn't really do a good job of stressing the importance of the imperfect. And so the imperfect is another way to speak in the past tense in Spanish. And so Madrigal doesn't even get it doesn't even really get into the imperfect until, again, chapter 39. So that's, I don't know how many days it would take you to get through all the way up to chapter 39, but imagine eventually getting to chapter 39 after having learned the other type of past tense, which is the preterite, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, well, here's this imperfect. It would seem like it's not that important, but it is, because the imperfect is how you are going to tell stories about what happened to your past, or what happened in your past. And so, for example, if you want to say something about when you were a child, like if I had a pet when I was younger, like you're not going to use the preterite for that. You're going to use the imperfect for that. And there's two different ways you say that. So the imperfect, you will say, cuando yo era niño, or cuando yo era joven, tenía un perro, as opposed to any other way. Like, I don't know if there's another way to say that. Like, you need the imperfect, and Madrigal doesn't go over it or emphasize the imperfect, rather, until chapter 39. It does talk about the imperfect, but again, the key is the emphasis on the imperfect. So those are the three main reasons why I wouldn't recommend Madrigal, even though I used the book, to anyone considering like what I know now about the Spanish language and other resources that I use. So speaking of other resources, now let me tell you what I would use, and I'll tell you the pros and cons of this book. Quick edit. I forgot to mention that in November 2024, Madrigal actually will be releasing an audio version of their book. And so it will have a listening component. Again, because I'm a language junkie, I have the book pre-ordered and I'm going to listen to all 12 hours of it. But it's good to know that they do now have, or they will have, a language listening component for a book that is well known in the community and that a lot of people use. This is the book that I would recommend that anyone starts with if they're going to start their own Spanish language learning journey from a book. I haven't used all the books, but I do know I've used this one, and I used Madrigal, and I've gone through this book twice. So why do I say use this book? So it's called the Complete Spanish Step-by-Step Guide. And as opposed to Madrigal, this book emphasizes the use of to, or the informal way of speaking, which again, it's important. And so it's going to give you examples of how to use that. And in the exercises, it's going to ask you things such as like that put you in a situation in which you're talking to someone in an informal way, which is like your friend or family or things like that. So number one, it does that. Number two, it has a listening component. And so you can test whether or not what you think this book is saying, or what you think you are understanding it. You can go to a web app that it has, or the mobile app, right? So a web app, you can go on a website, or you can use an application. It's the same application, but you can go to it either on the website or on your mobile phone, and you can listen to not only the vocabulary and not only the exercises, but the reading exercises that is in this book. And you can listen to the sound. That way you get used to the Spanish sound, and you can correct what you have heard or what you think you heard if you were doing it incorrectly. But not only that, this book actually has an audiobook version. And so in addition to this book, you can go on Audible to get the audio version of this book, and you will essentially be taught the same things that you are being taught in this book at the same time. And it is meant to be an audio course. So you're now hearing what you're learning in this physical copy of the book when you're driving in your car, or when you're doing exercise, or whatever it is that you're doing that puts you in a situation where you can listen to an audiobook. And the benefit of that, again, is just reinforcing what you have already learned in this physical book. Now, one thing I would say about the audiobook, though, is that the post-production of the audiobook is very choppy. So it's not the best. And just to give you a couple of examples of that, if once you get to chapter 2 of the audio version of this book, it's going to sound like you're listening to an old CD that just keeps skipping in and out. So that's the first thing. The second thing about the audio version of the book is if you don't go through the physical copy of the book first, you won't notice the part in the audiobook where they introduce the exercises for chapter 7 first before actually going over the content in chapter 7. And so you'll get to the audio version of chapter 7 and you'll be listening like, why are you asking me how do I say this if you've never actually gone over it? Or why are you saying things like, hey, don't you remember how you say that? Like, so the post-production is not the best in the audio version. But if you go through the physical version first, you will understand. And if you're listening to this, watching this video, you will say, okay, that's what he was talking about. So in the audio course, you can just skip ahead, listen to the content for chapter 7, and then go back to the exercise portion of chapter 7, and it'll be okay. And the last thing that I will say about this book is, in the audio version of the book, rather, is that this book has stories, it has readings so that you can get used to reading in Spanish. But the narrator for the audio version, he is a native Spanish speaker and he has a very thick accent. And so, and not only is it a thick accent, it's a dry accent. So when he's reading these stories, the way that the native Spanish narrator reads the story is not very entertaining. So once you get used to that again and get over it, you'll be okay, because guess what? We can't always pick our instructors. So, and then the last thing, again, as opposed to Madrigal, what this book does really well is it emphasizes the use of the imperfect tense. And imperfect tense, like I said, is important. So those things are why I would use this book and start with this book to start my Spanish journey, knowing what I know now over Madrigal, because you don't want to learn a lot of stuff that you're going to eventually have to unlearn. The last thing I would say about this book, though, is that there's actually, this book, Complete Spanish Step by Step, is actually 2 books in one. The first 15 chapters of this book is from the book called Easy Spanish Step by Step, and the next 15 chapters, chapters 16 through 30, is from the book Advanced Spanish Step by Step. Now, to be honest, I believe anyone that's starting their Spanish journey only really needs the first 15 chapters in this book, and they need to master those first 15 chapters first before moving on to chapters 16 through 30. Now, I am someone that typically like to go through a resource first and then go back to the material. Like if you get this book, you're welcome to do that. But obviously everyone has a different style and approach to learning. But the first 15 chapters of this book, or the content in Easy Spanish Step by Step, covers pretty much everything that you will need to know so that you can eventually continue on your Spanish language learning journey by reading books and understanding things such as the direct and indirect pronouns are being used, the difference between the preterite and the imperfect, and all the other nuances and basic things that many people don't understand when it comes to Spanish, yet they want to start talking and listening. All that in a nutshell to say that is my recommendation. Do not start with Madrigal's Magic Key to Spanish. Start with Complete Spanish Step by Step, or the first 15 chapters, Easy Spanish Step by Step. Hopefully this video was helpful and it's going to save you a bunch of money and a lot of frustrations. And good luck on your Spanish speaking journey. Peace.